tonight we're going to be exploring some different approaches to the same question. One of the biggest challenges people in the UK and indeed across the world face right now is that of precariousness, lack of security and stability in work, housing, food supply, citizenship status. It's increasingly challenging to meet needs and to create a sense of belonging by forming deep roots and connection with people in place. This is a core characteristic of our current economic system, one that causes huge amounts of stress and mental health issues. And it's also a key barrier to unlocking our collective skills and imagination. So if we recognise that the next 10 years needs to feel like a revolution in the imagination, how do we create the best possible conditions for that? How do we create what some are starting to think of as an imagination infrastructure? What big policy interventions might create the space that society needs to live less precarious lives and have the time and energy to imagine and build a different future? So this evening, we are so fortunate to be joined by three amazing guests. They were all our top three choices on the list for this evening, and we couldn't have been happier when they all said yes. So I'm just going to introduce them for you tonight. So we have Tchiyiwe Chihana, who works for Opus Independence on the UBI Lab Network. She's co-founder of UBI Lab Women and is on the board of World Basic Income. Her current areas of work include exploration of how a UBI can tackle the climate and ecological crisis, as well as social justice issues. Coote is a principal fellow at the New Economics Foundation and is a leading analyst, writer, and advocate in social policy. She is co-author of The Case for a 4-Day Week and The Case for Universal Basic Services. She leads the Social Guarantee Initiative, which promotes collective measures to ensure everyone has access to life's essentials. Michael Pugh is director and co-founder of the Basic Income Conversation, which blends organising, advocacy and research to promote a basic income in the UK. He has a background in community organising, having previously worked on the Living Wage campaign whilst at Citizens UK. Thank you all so much for joining us.
So I'd like to invite each of our speakers to share 8 to 10 minutes with us of their reflections on a couple of questions. So we'd love you to set out what you see as being the most skillful intervention a state could make to reduce precarity and to unlock the imagination of its citizens. What are the big ideas as we emerge from COVID that could give a society in as equitable a way as possible the breathing space it needs in order to be able to truly reimagine and rebuild everything on the scale and with the urgency that the climate and ecological emergency demands? Tchiyiwe, can we start with you?
Yes, thanks a lot, Rob. So my name is Tchiyiwe Chihana from the UBI Lab Network. And whilst it's of no significant meaning, what I do on a day-to-day basis, my job role is that of strategic engagement. It means it's versatile and I can respond in multifaceted ways in order to see our aim of UBI as a pilot and its ultimate implementation. So just to give you a bit of background on the UBI Lab Network, it's a worldwide network of citizens, researchers, activists who are exploring the potential of universal basic income. And we speak of UBI as a regular unconditional payment given to everyone every week or every month. Everyone receives it regardless of their income, wealth, or employment status. A universal basic income guarantees a basic level of financial security for everyone, and it makes sure nobody in society falls through the cracks. For example, it supports people doing unpaid work, such as caring for relatives. We believe that a UBI could provide financial security for all, building more resilient economies and giving everyone the resources they need to thrive. And we believe the time has come to pilot this new idea. The support for radical economic policies has seen a surge since the pandemic due to precariousness and increased insecurity. Among those is universal basic income, be it here in the United Kingdom and elsewhere in the world. We've seen calls for pilots growing right here. It's been announced as well most recently that Wales will pilot a basic income. The argument for UBI has become stronger since the governments around the world announced massive fiscal stimuli due to COVID. For me, however, what has recently caught my attention is another avenue of research that is emerging. This is on the impact of UBI on the climate and ecological emergency. And it's in this light that I would like to put to you that genuine climate justice means thinking big when it comes to economic inequality. Climate action needs to be global in order to be effective. And I'll be transparent and tell you right now that despite my introduction about my interest in UBI, in the environmental and ecological crisis, I've only stepped into this area of work now. And so as I speak to you now, it's very explorative because I'm intrigued by it. And it's not a field that has just started, but it's growing it's been growing in the last few years. But stick with me. Climate and environmental emergencies are being declared to highlight the unsustainable ways in which humans over a few generations have transformed the planet. But if we aim to reduce carbon emissions to net zero by 2025, and if we strongly intend to do this quickly, we need to be talking right now about how we can achieve this. When you ask me what the big ideas are as we emerge from COVID, ideas that could give a society in as equitable a way as possible, the breathing space it needs in order to truly be able to reimagine and rebuild with the urgency of the climate emergency demands, I thought definitely a universal basic income. Mark Maslin and Simon Lewis argued that we could work less and consume less and still meet our needs if we had a universal basic income. Fear for the future would recede, meaning we wouldn't have to work even harder for fear of having no work in the future. The pandemic made us think on our feet about how to get around some of the difficulties the world was facing, including the climate and ecological crisis. Our interconnected network of cultures relies on a stable global environment. We now need to design national and international policies to deal with this global climate and environmental emergency. The temporary halt to normal life we saw last year and this year due to lockdowns is not only not enough to stop climate change, it is also not sustainable. Like climate change, COVID-19 has hit the most vulnerable the hardest. The climate and ecological crisis has increased economic inequality between individuals and countries. In addition to not sharing equally in the direct benefits of fossil fuel use, many countries have been significantly harmed by the warming arising from wealthy countries' energy consumption. Climate change is intrinsically linked to social justice and structural inequalities, and therefore requires a holistic and collaborative and urgent response. To start with, all global citizens need to be able to participate in climate action without compromising other critical needs. And to enable this, there has to be an equitable distribution of capital so that we all have the financial capacity to play our part. Growing evidence is suggesting that poorer countries or individuals are more negatively affected by a changing climate because they lack the resources for climate protection. There's evidence that education attainment is higher, healthcare costs go down, entrepreneurship levels, both in numbers of people and success rates, go up as does self-reported happiness when people have a universal basic income. UBI could help people purchase, for example, longer lasting and eco-friendly goods, including sustainably produced foods that are now financially out of reach. For example, the purchase of bulk cheaper clothes that are unsustainable and only worn 2 or 3 times by people. A UBI could break the link between work and consumption. It eliminates extreme poverty and reduces dependency. It gives people the agency to say no to undesirable work, including much environmentally damaging work, and gives a yes to opportunities that often lie out of reach. With UBI, we could all think long-term, well beyond our next paycheck, and be able to care for a wider world to protect the planet. Maslin and Lewis have further argued that people would be able to plan for the future and afford the luxury of taking action now to avoid negative environmental impacts on future generations. This is a globally transformative policy. So to perhaps come around and firmly establish my position on the most skillful intervention a state could make to reduce or abolish the precariousness and unlock the imagination of its citizens, I stand with you and I say that give the people a universal basic income.
Tchiyiwe, thank you so much. Fantastic. And moving on to Anna. Anna, over to you.
Hello, everyone. It's good to be here. I'm going to share my screen with you because I've got some slides just to help things along here. So here we go. Okay, so I'm going to talk about what we call the social guarantee. And this is an idea about how we can improve our lives and our prospects, and in a way that is good for human and planetary well-being. And it's this social guarantee that we only launched the website last week. So you're hearing about something that is what we used to call hot off the press, but it's new. And it tries to include, it is a way of including cash and in-kind benefits. So I'll try and explain it as quickly as I can within the time I've been given. First of all, let's start with what do we think the goals that we share. First of all, that everyone is entitled to life's essentials, and everyone is entitled to both services and income that meet their needs. So we have a right to have our needs met, and that all social provision must be both fair and ecologically sustainable. So I think we can all agree there. The trouble is you can't always buy what you need. You can't buy many of life's essentials unless you're extremely rich. For example, healthcare and education, care for children and disabled adults, and for many also housing, transport and internet access is something that only people who are well off can afford. So what these call for, they are life's essentials. We can't afford to pay for them individually. So they call for public services and other collective things, measures that we will do together. And I think there is a danger that if we just focus on cash, it obscures the value of meeting needs through collective action. And also it endangers the funds that are needed for services. So we're trying to really bring these two things together. And I think it helps to see meeting needs on a spectrum. So as this slide suggests, at one end, we rely on individual cash payments, and at the other end, we depend on collective action through shared institutions, public authorities and community-based groups and things like that. Most often, to meet all of our needs, we need a combination of both. We need a combination of individual cash payments and collective measures. This is how the social guarantee is summed up. It includes, on the one hand, a living income, which is derived from a fair living wage combined with an income guarantee. And on the other side, universal services, which will include things like education, health and social care, and so on, all those that are mentioned there, and could also be extended to other areas which may be considered life's essentials. So the idea is that we pool resources, work together to meet all our needs so that we can all live well within planetary boundaries. This is the book that I wrote that was published last year, The Case for Universal Basic Services, which is within the social guarantee. It's a framework for policy and practice. It's about pooling resources and sharing risks, as I've said. It enlarges what you would call we could call the social income or the virtual income to provide everyone with secure foundations. And this is really important that it's both universal and it's sufficient. So it brings these two things together. Here's a bit more about UBS in practice. It's about investing in the social infrastructure on which all our lives depend, and the economy depends as well. We can learn a lot from our existing experience, the successes and failures of welfare services to date. So there's plenty to build on, and we need to be very aware of what's gone well and what hasn't gone so well so that we can get it right. It's about a universal entitlement so that everyone has a right. It's not a concession or a privilege, it's a right to life's essentials, to the services that meet our needs. And it's not about top-down provision, that we support multiple models of ownership and control, so co-ops, social enterprises, but we want to eliminate profiteering. And we want to put people in control so that decisions are in the hands of people who use services, and the bigger decisions about the parameters of the social guarantee and priorities are grounded in a democratic dialogue. Haven't got time to go into that, but that's an important element. Now, this is both radical and pragmatic. It can be introduced gradually, so it isn't a sort of silver bullet. Now, this leaves the government and governments, the idea of the state and governments, in a particular position. So we would say that where appropriate, governments through local authorities or nationally will provide services directly, and sometimes that's the right thing to do. But beyond that, they have four important functions: to ensure equal access, to set and enforce standards, to collect and invest funds so that they are equitable across countries, and then to support local control and coordinate services for the best outcomes. Now, I've got some examples here, but I don't think I'm going to have time to go through them. But the point is that in each, I'm looking at childcare and housing and at food, and in each of them, it's not about simply providing a service. It's about a package of measures that will make sure that everyone has access to a service that is sufficient, universal, and affordable. So we look at Norway as an example for childcare. We've gone right across Europe and in other countries across the world as well to see where the best examples of good practice are. We can learn from Vienna and Freiburg and Copenhagen for housing, where we're looking not just at bricks and mortar, but at what a community is like, how well it's connected, how much control residents have, and so on. And of course, sustainability is very important here. And then food, this is much more complicated because we all expect to be able to pay for food ourselves, and we certainly don't want to have a huge increase in government provided food banks or anything. That's not what we're going, but you can't ensure that everyone has access to decent, culturally appropriate and nutritious food unless you have public policies as well as individual payments. So to regulate production, to make sure that the food is available, to make it sustainable, and to see it also in a global context, because the food choices that we make affect the food choices of people all over the world. I'm sorry, that's a very, very swift rush through the examples of how the social guarantee would be put into practice, but it's the best I can do in the time that's available. So I've just got a few more slides to finish up. We want to say that if we try to make sure that people meet their needs or get access to life's essentials through these collective measures rather than just through individual market transactions, there are real gains to be made in terms of equality, efficiency, solidarity, and sustainability. We think that quality public services can help to prevent harm to health and social well-being, that they can generate a great deal of secure employment across all skills levels and help to stabilize the economy. So, and then when it comes to the ecological dimension of sustainability, there's a great deal that you can do through shared institutions and collective action to cut harmful emissions and safeguard natural resources. There's plenty more written about that I haven't, again, got time to talk about now. The social guarantee, this approach is all about building solidarity, not just about giving individuals purchasing power. And there's a lot of evidence that shared collective measures are much more efficient than market measures when it comes to things like healthcare, for example. So those are the gains. Now, I want to talk very briefly about the limits of cash-based solutions. Now, this is not what we've heard just now, but there are many UBI campaigners and campaigns that give out a signal that the thing that matters most is money, so that people can buy things and that this can fix problems of poverty and inequality. And as I hope I've made clear, money isn't enough. You need collective action, shared measures, collective responsibility, public services as well, so that you've got both going together. And this approach, the UBI approach, supports consumer choice. And I mean, I was very interested to hear what was said just now about how it's good for the environment. I'm still have to be convinced on that, but I feel that most UBI campaigns pay absolutely no heed to ecological limits, but perhaps that's something that will develop. There's been plenty of research that tells us that UBI can't both be sufficient to live on and affordable for the public purse at the same time. And while it's often claimed to be progressive, we have to remember that many versions of it are libertarian and monetarists, appealing to neoliberals and Silicon Valley tycoons who really just want the public to have just enough money to keep on shopping while they carry on making profits. So it doesn't do anything to disturb the dynamics of capitalism. That's my view. But UBI can mean almost anything. And there are so many different versions of it that there is a version of UBI that is really compatible with the social guarantee. And we could call that a basic income guarantee. And I was interested that phrase came up with the last speaker. So there is a way forward here. If we look at the service side of meeting needs and the money side of meeting needs, both are essential. They are two sides of the same coin. So UBS represents a social income, collectively funded, sufficient and universal according to need, not ability to pay. Then if you have an enlarged social income, secure services with things like healthcare and education and childcare and housing and transport, it means that people need less cash income to meet their needs and flourish. So what matters here is the threshold of payment to individuals and the trade-offs. How much money are you going to invest in universal basic income, for example, and how much money will be left for services? You can't have a level of cash payments that will starve funds from collective services. And some people say, oh, well, there's always more money out there. We can always get it. Look at what happened in COVID. Governments can find money if they want to. But we desperately need additional funds for climate mitigation, for green infrastructure, as well as for services. So I think, we can't just go on assuming there'll always be more and more money. I realize that's a long conversation there. So this one cash payment scheme, which is compatible, is a basic income guarantee, which is collectively funded, sufficient, and universal according to need, not ability to pay. So in conclusion, social guarantee is universal and sufficient. It's about more and better collective services, and it's about an income guarantee that gives everyone security that their income will not fall below an agreed level. And I'd have to point out that is different from paying everyone money whether they need it or not. Cash and in-kind benefits have to support each other. They're two sides of the same coin, and they have to be designed in a way that really support each other. So you can't have a cash payment scheme that's a barrier to more and better public services. We see the social guarantee as central to a reimagined welfare system for post-pandemic recovery. So it will boost well-being for all, it can generate new employment, it can stabilize the economy. It is, if you like, the social pillar of a Green New Deal, which will help to create a safe and just space for humanity. So that's my pitch, and this is where to find us. And please do visit us and tweet about us, and we'd love to hear back from you. Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you so much. Very good. This is, yes, wonderful. So, Michael, over to you now for your take.
Thank you so much, Rob, Rhiannon and Richard for organising this, and great to see so many of you on the call this evening. I've been really looking forward to this, and especially as such an international call this evening, this afternoon, this morning, wherever you are. So I'm the director and co-founder of the Basic Income Conversation, but my background is in community organising. So perhaps quite similar to many of the people involved in Transition UK and around the world. And we exist to support people and organisations, particularly from grassroots civil society backgrounds, to start their own conversations, like the one that we're having tonight, about basic income and what it can mean for society. I hope tonight can spark more conversations within your communities and organisations about this big idea, and we'll share more at the end about how we can support you with that. So Ahead of this evening, as you heard, Richard and the team posed to us this question, which was, think about a state intervention that could help us reimagine and rebuild everything on a scale and with the urgency that the climate emergency demands. Now, that's quite a big question that you've set us. And by definition, I would say the scale that is demanded means that we can't have just one intervention. But I will be talking about just one for the next 8 or 10 minutes or so, which is basic income. I'm conscious that Tchiyiwe's gone. I've got the task of trying to go after Tchiyiwe, who's outlined some of the arguments already. But I'm also under no illusions that this is the only intervention that we need. Basic income certainly isn't a silver bullet to all of our problems at all. And it's great that we're talking about basic services as well tonight. It was really great to hear Anna speak about that and how the two ideas interact and intersect in different ways. And I agree with much of what Anna said, and looking forward to the conversation later on. And I'm sure there's other vitally important interventions out there that won't get discussed tonight. So in saying that, I'm going to make a case for, I do believe that basic income can be central and vital to help powering the transition that we do require. And I first wanted to clarify what I think the problem here is. And I don't think it's about imagination. It's not a problem of imagination. We're teeming with imagination as a society. Our politics can be quite gloomy at times, particularly in the last week since the local elections here in the UK, but it ignores something that's really exciting that's happening all around us. And that's that people have ideas to transform society. And not only have you got ideas, but day in, day out, people are making them happen on the ground as we speak. And most of you taking part this evening, I would imagine, are involved in this work in your communities and are very much part of the solution. The problem, however, I see is that some people are locked out of that experience. You probably would love to spend more time doing the often voluntary work that's involved in local transition groups, transition towns, involved in groups voluntarily, but the pressures of life get in the way. But the reality is that many people, probably most people, don't even have the luxury of getting involved in that in the first place. How am I supposed to think about the climate emergency or volunteering with my local group when I don't even know if I'm going to have food on the table next month, or if I'll be getting the same number of shifts at work next month, or if I still live in the same neighborhood in 6 months' time because of the rent going up, or if I have the mental health required and the energy required to really contribute in a meaningful way. And it's that same problem that leads to some of our work often being accused of a middle class pursuit and perhaps not as inclusive or as diverse as our values would want them to be. And I think the real problem here then is moving on to precariousness or precarity or insecurity. And I think insecurity is the overwhelming experience of our age. It's this sense of instability that is now pervading society. People are insecure in their work, insecure in their housing, in their mental health, very close to or in debt. And this is being driven by our unstable climate and our unstable politics. And as the systems that were previously there to catch us when we fall are now broken or unable to meet the changing patterns of work. And the pandemic has exposed just how urgently we need something that can give us that greater security. I think we've all experienced insecurity in some way, that feeling of everything being turned upside down and looking down and suddenly there's not much to stand on. And we've learned that something that probably all of us on this call already knew all along, which was actually insecurity is unequally distributed across society, and people have been feeling this actually for years and years before the pandemic hit. And our existing social security system has proven ill-equipped, unfortunately, at supporting people through this crisis. I know we've seen the furlough scheme, but we've also seen millions of people and families fall through the gaps in the government support schemes. At the same time, we've heard people compare the pandemic to World War II and its aftermath, and how we must use this moment to build back better, to rebuild a system fit to face the challenges of the 21st century. And it's been really exciting to see this unprecedented cross-party coalition of politicians, but groups across civil society as well, come out and start taking an interest or putting their name behind basic income as an idea for the first time. And we've seen support for this idea that's actually quite an old idea that goes back centuries actually in its history, really resurface and take off and grow in the last year. So what is it? I mean, Tchiyiwe's touched on it earlier with the definition, so I won't go into any more detail than that. But the only thing that I would add is, I see it really as an income floor that nobody could fall below, and in a similar language to how Anna has described in terms of a guarantee that the state makes with you, but also a springboard for you to aspire to really do what you really want to be doing in life. And I think there's, as Anna touched on, there are different proposals out there for how you would design and implement a basic income in practice. If you like, it's a bit like a family of ideas with different proposals across a spectrum. But I suppose the core concept is based on this idea that we all have a right to some financial security, particularly at a time when so many of us are experiencing insecurity. And if we are able to enact something like a basic income, it really can be our generation's NHS. We're talking about that scale. So if the NHS helped us give us free healthcare as a right, basic income can give everyone some financial security as a right. And with security comes greater freedom. Freedom to make choices that's best for you and your families. That might be balancing some jobs, going back into education to learn some new skills, spending more time caring for loved ones or volunteering in a local community. The pilots that have taken place around the world have consistently shown one thing overwhelmingly, which is it improves health of people and society. So it leads to less stress, less social isolation, reduced crime and reduced domestic violence. It gives security from the indignity as well, and often does away with the stigma that's so often attached to being on benefits in this country. Security also builds resilience to shocks. In many ways, it's not really about the amount of money that's in the basic income, but it's the regularity of it. It's knowing that at least something is coming in each week to pay for food on the table. And it also gives you people the chance to take some risks and be entrepreneurial. It might be starting your own business or going self-employed or taking part in a community project or something like that. But for me, what I think basic income offers the most is breathing space. And this was the part of the question. I was lucky enough to visit the US, Canada, and India in 2019, visiting the various pilots that had been taking place there. I went to Stockton, California, which some of you might have heard of. A couple of months ago released its latest pilot results, which were quite encouraging. But at the time, the researchers were hearing a phrase over and over again, unprompted by the participants, but they kept using the same phrase, and it was, "I can breathe again. I can breathe again." And think about that for a moment, and think about then the society that we currently live in, which literally has the boot on people's necks and is strangling our collective breath and our collective imagination. In many ways, basic income isn't really the solution in and of itself. It's not a panacea, it's not the silver bullet, but it helps us get there. It's quite literally almost the oxygen of our transition. And when we ask people in the conversations that we run on a regular basis, how people would feel if they had a basic income, almost every time it's words like cushion, headspace, breathing space, blanket of security. So, and it always accompanies the kind of sound of like, or an exhale of breath, as people would feel. And it's that stress leaving one's mind and imagination creeping in. And so basic income for me is really the breathing space, which allows somebody to work one less shift a week, which might enable them to go to that night class to retrain in a new skill, potentially for the new skills required for the new economy we see. It's that breathing space to take some risks and go ahead and start that community project or small business that you've always wanted to do and think can change the world or your community, and knowing that there's something to fall back on. It's that breathing space to commit to the hardest and most valuable and most green work that there is in society, and that's care work, such as parenting children or looking after loved ones. It's currently valued at zero by the market and the state. And it's that breathing space that can help us reimagine what work and contribution really means in society. So it's within that breathing space that I think we'll find the solutions. I'm not saying that we have all the solutions at all, but it's in that breathing space that we will find them collectively, and that will be necessary for us to rebuild what we need to rebuild post-pandemic. But it's basic income that can help ensure that that breathing space is accessible to all of us, and ensures that therefore we can draw on everyone's imagination in order to address the emergency we face. So to conclude, in my mind, basic income isn't the solution, it's the enabler. It's the oxygen that's going to help us have that imagination and to get to where we need to go and to find those solutions that we need. And I suppose an enabler to participation as well. So that's enough for me. I'm so looking forward to the breakout rooms and the discussion that we're going to get into this evening. But that's enough of my voice for now.
Wow, Michael, thank you so much. Absolutely fantastic. And I can see there's already people are starting to put questions in the chat. We're going to just hold off that because we have had so much rich food for thought here so far this evening, and like any delicious banquet of scrumptious offerings, we've always found that the best reflections and questions and responses come after sufficient space is given for digestion. Michael has just talked beautifully about the need for space and what that gives us. We're going to give you a bit of space now. So we're going to invite you over the next 15 minutes or so in small groups to mobilize your mind's digestive juices, if that's not a horrible mangling of analogies, and in conversation with your breakout room co-tenants to reflect on what you've just heard. What particularly inspired or delighted, confused, appalled, moved, or affected you? And what are the questions that are bubbling up? So Rich is going to pop you into chat rooms, and we will see you back here in 15 minutes, fully digested, with some brilliant questions that will then underpin and inform the rest of our conversation. So we will see you very shortly.
People are coming back in. We wanted to ask our three guests if they have any reflections on what you heard from the other two guests. So after hearing the other speakers, is there anything particular that stood out for you, something that you'd like to reflect on after hearing the others' presentations? And yeah, Michael, perhaps we'll start with you to mix up the order a bit.
Sure. I mean, it's one of those evenings where it's not like there's a kind of ideas being opposite to each other, where there's mass disagreement that I have with anything that anyone else has said, and I think that in and of itself is really welcome. And if you would have checked into a universal basics event maybe 2 or 3 years ago, you'll have seen much more of a framing in terms of how these two ideas are opposed to each other, or don't fit together, or worse, kind of actively undermine each other. And I think the fact that you're not hearing that this evening, I think, is significant. And I think there's greater emphasis now on how these two ideas can interact. I would agree with much of what Anna says. I think certainly if there's too much of a focus on either or, if there's too much focus on cash, or if there's too much focus on in-kind benefits, then that poses some risks. And I think for too long that those two, as I said, there's been too much disagreement around that. If you like, I suppose what Tchiyiwe and I have tended to focus our time on is, thinking about in Anna's table in terms of the social guarantee. On the in-cash side, we're talking about the kind of living income or guaranteed income element of that. I've worked previously on the living wage, as I said at the beginning, in terms of that element of that kind of guarantee, that offer from the state. So clearly I'm focused more on the cash element, but that's not to say that it can't interact with other services. In saying that, I think there is some really, as Anna said, like some things you can't, money can't buy. And I think there are some areas where there's some grey that I think should be more discussion. I think there's just one that Anna provided there, which maybe is worth looking at, is food. And I think that's one area where it might be a little bit more complicated. And I think one story that some of us might remember in the last few months that kind of illustrated this quite nicely was the Marcus Rashford stuff. Those in the UK, the footballer who kind of raised the issue of free school meals, and how there was photos of packages, the food parcels that parents had been given, and they were like absolutely tiny, and everyone was outraged at how would a parent be able to feed a family based on that food parcel. Now, the one response was, actually, why don't you just give it in cash? Why don't you just give everybody that money, that £30, and just give that to the parent, and then they can spend it as they wish, and they could buy the food and trust them to make the right decisions for them and their family. And that's kind of one approach. And then the other approach was pointing to, well, hang on a minute, actually the government just privatized that to Chartwell's, a really crappy service provider that gave out this really crap meal. And actually in other parts of the country, you know, that food parcel was actually better distributed by local authorities, and maybe is some examples of where services have been given out in a better way. So I think there's like, food is one of the areas I think where you run into this debate in a much more concrete and tangible way, and examples that people can see, where they're actually, it's not impossible to do free school meals and things, you know, really highly efficient and effective, and maybe more efficient way. But equally, like, where's the role of like just trusting people to spend the money as they want to? And I think there's so basically I think food is one of the areas in which there should be more discussion. But yeah, that's enough of me, as we'll get into the questions, I'm sure.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and there's quite a few questions coming in. Tchiyiwe, did you have any reflections from hearing other people speak?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Michael, for that. And Anna, really appreciate your position. And I think just to put it out there, I do not see a situation where UBI is the silver bullet, and so I do welcome UBS as well. So alongside that, just to add on to a little bit to Michael Ref talked about the benefits of we've seen in some of the trials and pilots around the world, some of the unexpected consequences, for example, in the United States, where children actually performing better in school, women, single mothers getting entrepreneurial as well. So that was a pilot that was done in Michigan, and so there are other benefits that are actually still being uncovered that I think would be very beneficial. Mental health as well, and when I spoke about reported happiness, happier self-identity, that's really a good consequence, I think, of what a universal basic income is. And those are some of the benefits, obviously, that we would want to see within what universal basic services would provide. But just to understand that when you have it's literally a financial flow, it's a basic income that provides a security. That's what that would be.
Great, thank you, Tchiyiwe. And Anna, did you want to come in with any comments from hearing the other people, the speakers speak? I think you're on mute there, yeah.
Yes, I do. There's lots to say, and I find myself wishing that, you know, the problem that I've always found with people who support UBI is that they always say they're in favor of services as well, but it's kind of like they will take it for granted, as though it's not threatened, and that we don't have to think about how to develop and improve and extend the services that we've got, and also the impact of a generous UBI on the resources that we have to improve our services. So that's one thing. So I would say, I don't ever want to hear a UBI supporter say, yes, we're in favor of services, without also hearing that you're going to try to work out how to improve them. And you're going to be part of the movement. So please, you know, join us with the social guarantee so that we can work to reclaim the collective ideal, to develop the idea of high quality services. I completely agree with Michael that there's no point having services that are rubbish, and they're often rubbish because they've been farmed out. We want to keep them under public control, under shared control. So that's one thing. Then this idea about precariousness or precarity. Yes, it's a real problem. But how precarious would we feel if we didn't have free education, if we didn't have free health service? And how much less precarious might we feel if we have childcare that we can rely on and afford, if we had adult social care that we could rely on and afford, if we knew we could afford a decent home because of a combination of services and public investment that made that possible? So this is where it comes back to the idea of understanding that income has two sides to it. There is the cash income and there is the social income. And you can't have one without the other. And so it really ought to be sorry to say this, but I think every single supporter of UBI, it's incumbent on you to think about the other side of the coin. You've been thinking about one side of the coin for 40 years, and it's almost like a sort of religious devotion to the cash element. But and it's not about how many people can you trust to, you know, can you trust people to spend money? Of course we can trust people to spend money. It's how much can we afford to give to everybody, including all those people who don't need it, that without starving the in-kind benefits, the services, the collective activities that we also need that are vital to our precarity, without starving them of funds. So we just, my passion to get over this dichotomy, the only way it's going to happen is not just me banging on about services, it's you lot, you universal basic income devotees, who've got to start banging on about services as well. Okay? And just one last word on these wretched pilots. I mean, yes, the Welsh government say they're going to do a pilot. We don't know what it's going to be like. I was actually on the Radio Wales about this morning. They don't know how much they're going to pay, who it's going to be paid to. If it were going to be a sensible income guarantee service pilot, then that would be something really to value and to think about. And there'd be no pilots, none of the ones in the United States, except for one in Alaska, where it's actually endured beyond the pilot phase. Why? Because governments can't afford it or don't want to afford it. So we have to be a bit skeptical about what's called the evidence about the success of universal basic income in different settings. So yeah, we need to think again. You've got to think about the whole package, both sides of the coin.
Thank you, Anna. And so to clarify, are you saying that we wouldn't financially have enough money to afford both UBI and UBS? Are you saying that there has to be some kind of decision making or understanding about how they work together? Because when I heard your presentation, I thought, well, I want both. You know, I want UBI and UBS, but it sounds like you're saying not.
Let me explain what an income guarantee would be. A guarantee that everyone's income should not fall below an agreed level of sufficiency. And we have these levels. We know what a minimum income standard is. We know what that could be. And so, but that's not saying that everyone gets the money, whether they need it or not. So it's much more affordable to pay when the income falls below that level. And that is like an enhanced and improved social protection or social security system. And we know that they can be a lot better than they are. They can be more generous, they can be less stigmatizing, there can be fewer hoops to jump through to get them, and they can just be as an entitlement. It can be part of our daily lives. Now you can afford that alongside an extended program of services that will give us access to life's essentials that we can't afford to pay for ourselves. But as soon as you say, well, if we have more money, then we can buy all of life's essentials ourselves, then you begin to seriously erode the idea that we're all in this together, that we live as a society, and that we must share responsibility for meeting the needs of all of us. Because we're just going to let the government, I mean, I wouldn't feel very unprecarious if I was relying on a handout from the government. Actually, look at the government we've got now. We could get a lot worse government. Would they carry on paying it? So, but the services that have got so much more complex and have different centers of power, they're more likely to endure. Anyway, I must stop banging on.
Thank you, Anna. And I'm going to pass over to Rob. So people have been putting.
Yeah, so there's lots and lots of questions coming in, and I'm going to kick us off by rolling two together. So John Schofield says, short of a revolution to overthrow the government and the corporations which hold sway, how can we actually make UBI or UBS happen? And then Becky Seal says, how do you see UBI landing with red wall voters in England? How do we get it beyond being branded as utopian, woke thinking, hard-earned cash going to waste, communist state kind of narratives and interpretations? So how do we take it from, how would we ground these ideas in reality? How do we get there? Michael, should we start with you?
There we go. Yeah, great, quite fantastic questions, and questions I think about a lot. So, essentially, how do we win? And I think what's encouraging here is that you are beginning to see a progressive alliance emerge around both ideas. Taking basic income as an example, it's because I've more invested in it, I suppose, is that we've started to see, the Green Party, the Liberal Democrats, sections of Labour, obviously the News in Wales, other parts of the country as well, expressing an interest in experimenting with it. I think you're beginning to see a political coalition emerge for something like a basic income. Ultimately, we've got to vote for it, and there's like big problems in the UK in terms of where we're currently at and where progressive parties are currently at, and I think it's got to be one at the ballot box. And we've got to continue to do that. I think we've missed key moments in our history. We've missed key opportunities to implement something like a basic income or expand basic services to a desirable level. And we've got to get to a point where politicians feel that they can't avoid this anymore. And that's continued to do in the movement building work that social guarantees doing around basic services, that UBI Lab Network and Basic Income Conversation are doing around basic income. In terms of red walls, or so-called red wall, interestingly, we did an event just before the local elections, because we did some polling in 4 red wall areas in the West Midlands, and it was really surprising, actually, in terms of the part of my mind thought, isn't this going to come across as too woke, too utopian? But actually, there's real fertile ground, I think, and what voters are saying there is this: they're often areas that map onto highest levels of precarity and insecurity, and risk of changes to work patterns. And so messages are, when it's framed as security, I think people really can see how this can really make a difference. And I think there's rightly, people have strong attachments to work and in our country and in its tradition. And I think we just need to reimagine what work is and think of it not as a threat to work, but this is actually really enshrining work. But it's just going to change in the future. As I said earlier, care work is going to be absolutely vital to our shifting economy. Different forms of work are, and we need to find a way of transitioning towards those. And as I said earlier, basic income isn't the answer. I'm not saying we're going to get to a point where work replaces all of that, but basic income can help us move to help reskill those people, to help give people security in those, which will be for some periods of years in which they don't have paid work in the traditional sense. So that actually went down very well in the polling that we've done, just a few focus groups. But I think, how does any idea go down in those areas is going to be a question of British politics moving forward.
Thank you. Anna, social guarantee, how do we get there from here?
Well, the great thing about the social guarantee is that it's both a radical vision and it's also with a long-term set of goals about sustainable social justice. And it's also something that you can break down into manageable incremental steps. So you don't have to do everything at once. So that's helpful in terms of appealing to politicians who are actually going to have to do this in government. And if you want to think about the cash side of the coin, if you like, yes, the way to get it through is to talk about a basic income guarantee, because it's affordable. It won't throw up all the barriers and difficulties that have generally stopped basic income being government policy everywhere in the world, except for Alaska, where it's, they've built it up on oil money. So yes, I think there is a way, and I think that and I would invite you all, please, look at the social guarantee website. You'll see how we are, how we're trying to develop a principled framework for introducing the means of everyone getting access to life's essentials. And because it is it's incremental, it's possible to say, okay, we don't, we of course we can't do it all at once. We don't need to have a revolution. Well, maybe some people would like that, but I don't think it's practical at the moment to think in those terms. But we can make progress slowly, steadily on all of these fronts and gradually inch our way towards a different kind of society where everybody has a right to the things that they really need. It's universal and sufficient.
Thank you. Tchiyiwe, how do we get there? How do we get there from here?
How do we get there from here? I think we have had a moment during this precarious period with COVID where we have actually seen the need for a safety net, and this was given to people through different schemes. It didn't cover everybody. A lot of people fell through those cracks, but then we have something to look at and say, actually, a safety net is something that should actually be available to everybody. When it comes to other means of giving a safety net, financial security to people, we've seen that means tested means that a lot of people fall through the cracks, and that's been happening even during this period of precarity. Also, the stigma attached to the processes of actually being given just the most basic money when you actually need it means that a lot of people who need it do not get it. And so it's important that we actually move beyond that stigma period and make it available to everybody who needs it, so that everybody who needs it actually gets it. And that's what we should be striving for.
Thank you. Thank you. Rhiannon, a question.
Yeah, there's a lot coming in. So one for Michael and Tchiyiwe first, I think, and then we'll have one for Anna because they're more specific. So what someone's just asking, where would the money come from to fund UBI, which I think is an important thing that we haven't outlined yet. And people are also asking for a bit more information about some of the UBI trials and what lessons have been learned from them. And then maybe after that, I'll come back to Anna with some specific questions about UBS.
Well, I do the funding bit and you do the pilot split, Tchiyiwe. So, I mean, in terms of funding, obviously we need to get the money from somewhere. And there's, I suppose, to simplify it, there's kind of two schools of thought, if you like, in terms of how you might go about funding something like a basic income. So, or three, but two of the most common is one is like a more progressive taxation system, changes to the current tax and benefit system that would effectively see the wealthiest pay more in taxes. And I don't just mean income taxes, you know, thinking about wealth taxes and other forms of ways in which we can target wealth distribution away from the wealthiest to something more akin to evenly distributing in the form of a basic income. So that's kind of one area, and a lot of the modelling that's done out there, and you'll often see in reports relate to that stuff. So tweaking taxes here and there, reducing personal income tax allowances, things like that. So that's kind of one realm of how you would go about paying for it. The other way is often talked about, well, how do you evenly distribute things that we all have a stake in? So as Anna's mentioned a couple of times there, in terms of Alaska, where each year they evenly distribute the profits from the oil reserves in Alaska. But there's obviously that's quite dated now. We don't want to be building a basic income on the back of oil. So thinking about what are the kind of modern versions of things that we already have an equal stake in. So things like our data, things potentially like carbon taxes, you know, profits of various, you know, for example, in India, they were talking about doing stuff off the profits of hydropower and tourism in their area. So it might look different in different places. So those are kind of two, to oversimplify. Obviously, we could go into more depth about, you know, how exactly you go about paying for it. There is also a theory of like sovereign money, which is like printing like government debt money, but we won't go into that now. But there are different ways of basically doing it, and people have different traditions about how you go about doing it.
Great, thank you. And yeah, Tchiyiwe, maybe you can give us a bit more information about some of the trials that have happened and what has been learned from them across the world.
Yeah, absolutely. In more recent times, there was the pilot in Finland, for example. Lots of misinformation out there around it having failed, when actually the final results showed that there were positive effects on health, well-being, and employment there. And also in Stockton, California, as Michael had pointed out, the reports there are very similar. People actually get jobs on the back of a UBI. They're not discouraged from working. Mental health improves. family circumstances also improve, meaning that like I was saying earlier, children get to perform better in school in households that this has been trialed. In India, a trial that took place there saw a lot of women get into their family businesses and become big providers within their family setting. And there's so many similar examples that are coming out of that. Again, in Kenya as well, there's been a similar pilot in Namibia as well, in Canada. So quite a lot of results that are there that show the positive effects of what a universal basic income could actually do for society. So it's not a retrogressive thing. It's actually a positive thing that will build and contribute to the economy. That money goes back into the local economy when people have it.
Can I just come in just there on the back of Tchiyiwe? I think the other important thing to say about trials, and they do show incredibly positive things in terms of what unconditional cash and cash transfers can do. But I think we've just also got to be honest that basic income hasn't been trialed, hasn't been fully rolled out anywhere in the world for any lengthy period of time. The drawback of piloting anything, including a basic income, is that you only have a certain amount of time to do it. So I think the ones in Kenya, for example, are really exciting because that's a 12-year study that they're taking part in there. But there are limitations to pilots as well. That means that we can't learn everything that we would like to around them. But I think that there's growing and mounting evidence, often from cash transfers in international development, that are now so-called more developed countries are looking at. And so not only have there been some really exciting over the last few years, there are also a number of more planned in the coming years, which are going to add to that evidence base.
Great, thank you.
Can I add on the trials? I have put a link up in the chat line to a review of the trials that we undertook for Public Services International Global Trade Union Federation. And I mean, what struck me was that, first of all, a trial for UBI in a development setting, in the sort of poor countries, is a very different kettle of fish from what it is in a rich country, and it could be seen as a kind of something that's to do with aid. It's very rarely universal in that case. It's almost always selective, and it's temporary. All these trials have been temporary, as Michael was saying, apart from the Alaska Fund. And so what you need to think about is why, when there's been so many trials all over the world, some of them, especially the ones in Africa, as I'm sure you know, is funded by charities. So, it's down to philanthropy whether you get your universal basic income or not. And I can't believe that's a good idea. So we need to pay attention to why none of these field experiments turned into an actual permanent scheme for people in any country, anywhere in the world, with the single exception of Alaska. So it isn't just that there are some good, sure, they have, if you give some people money, they're going to be pleased about it. There are good effects of giving people money, but there might be better effects for putting in an infrastructure of hospitals and schools and roads and housing that will make people feel secure and will enable people to fulfill their potential in a way that, a little bit of cash can't.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right, Anna. There's nothing to say that universal basic services shouldn't work alongside a universal basic income. What I think some of the, and yes, the trials are probably short term, but then you've also got to understand that there are changes in governments. So you have the political will as well of the political party that comes into power probably. And so some of them have been inhibited by that, but that's not to say that the results are redundant. There's evidence there to show what it can actually do for people.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions now for Anna on just a bit more about the UBS. So one question is, how does UBS differ from a really well-funded welfare state? So how is it different to maybe what we had before the Tories came and destroyed it all? And then another question from Reynard, how does Anna define affordability? In my assessment, as long as the total sum of basic income and basic services is within the GDP of a country, it's affordable, and it's a measurement of equality in a country. So yeah, a bit more about how the UBS differs from what we might have had a number of years ago, and how how you define what can be afforded by a country, I guess.
Well, let's start with the first question. There are lots of ways in which it does, although it does have some of the best features of the post-war welfare states in it, the idea of the social guarantee and universal basic services is different in a number of respects, which I think is important because, as I said in my talk, we need to learn from what didn't go so well with all of that, although most of it actually went really well when you think about it. But so we start with the fact that it's a needs-based theory. So we understand collectively, and we can do more of this through a democratic dialogue, what everyone actually needs. We've already done a lot of work on this through citizens' assemblies and through the minimum income standard and focus groups and so on. It's possible to reach a broad consensus about what we all actually need to live a sufficient and a flourishing life. So we start from that, and then you work out how best to deliver it. And some of it will be delivered partly through cash, and much of it will be delivered through collective measures, not just services, but regulation and government interventions. For example, it could be to cap rents or to refurbish houses on a huge scale, if you're looking at the housing sector, or to introduce free bus passes if it's a transport and so on. So in each area, it's a different approach, but within a principal framework. And that framework says it's an entitlement, not a concession. It's always available according to need, not ability to pay. It's not all about state provision. We would support multiple different models of ownership and control, provided that they all work in the public interest and that we minimize and eventually eliminate profit extraction from it. And there are others. I mean, I can't. It's all there on the social guarantee website. So it's both a continuation of the post-war welfare settlement, and it's also a really distinct difference from it because of what we've tried to learn along the way. And I mean, last but by no means least, that the whole thing is designed in order to be the social pillar of the Green New Deal. So that is what it is. It is part of the Green New Deal to make sure that all the actions that we take for the climate emergency and to stay within planetary boundaries can also be socially just. So that's a very big difference indeed from what it was. Now, what was the other one? What was the other question? Oh, what's affordable?
Yes, it was about affordability and
the whole package. Well, I think this is a very big discussion. I think there's my colleague Andrew Percy wrote the book on universal basic services. He's had a view that there's a level of beyond which you can't do public spending because it's not politically acceptable by any stretch of the imagination. I'm afraid I can't tell you offhand what that level is, but I think that if you consider that, well, there are two things. First of all, you've got to think about all the things we need to spend our shared resources on, which include, of the utmost priority now, the green infrastructure, all the things we need to do to make sure we can survive as a civilization beyond the next few decades. So there's that. And then also the enormous yield you get from investing in the social infrastructure. Now, some of these things are claimed on behalf of basic income, and maybe you'd get it through basic income, but it'd be much, much more expensive to do it that way. But you get results in terms of social solidarity, health and well-being, people being able to take and keep jobs, and so on. So there's a great raft of social, economic, and environmental benefits. I mean, employment is another one that if you invest in services, you get a lot of relatively secure jobs at all skills levels, most of which are green jobs. So you're investing in the social infrastructure to establish and enforce the social guarantee, if you like, and you get a huge yield back. So the affordability is partly about what is the return for the investment that we are making in our shared future.
Great, thank you. So Anne in Queensland, who I mentioned earlier, who's got up very, very early to be with us today, she said there's a question of how you'd get what she calls the nasty work done. if people could afford not to be enslaved. Fruit picking is proving a case in point in Australia, as we don't have any low backpacker labour anymore. So some of the arguments that I've seen around UBI seem to be predicated on the idea that all of the sort of more menial work is going to be done by robots. Is that the case? And we get the less desirable jobs done in society? Anna, maybe start with you.
Well, I mean, I'm an advocate of a shorter working week. So I think that that's one way in which we can reorganize our society in post-pandemic recovery, and as we move towards a world in which we have to consume less and have fewer emissions and so on. So I would go for a shorter working week. I would go for an expanded public sector that can generate jobs that are green jobs, and certainly not just pay people money to do nothing unless there was a good reason why they couldn't work. I mean, most people do want to work, actually. I mean, I think there's plenty of polling evidence on this. So, but we need decent pay and decent conditions and decent career progression as well. Does that answer the question, or?
Oops. Yeah. Thanks very much. Tchiyiwe, what's your thoughts on that question?
I think it's important to note that people still have to be able to have a choice. And if you choose to look after your children, to be the primary person that's going to look after your children, you should not be chastised for that, but you should be able to make that choice. If you choose to be a carer, you should be able to do that. And that's a decision you should have to make, not because you're unable to. And that's what a UBI can do. It empowers you with choice.
Can I respond to that? Sorry, but this is a very old debate, started way back in the 1970s in the women's movement, where some people were advocating what we then called wages for housework, because on the understanding that this is very valuable labor, which it is, and that women should be paid for it. But in the end, most people came around to the view that it trapped women in a position of dependency, and it's not about choice. It's almost the opposite of choice. If you pay people to do a job, it would only be a very small payment, by the way. So you'd have a very minimal payment for doing a very valuable job. Now, if on the other hand, mothers had access to really high quality childcare, they might want to do a job as well, a part-time job, certainly. So I think, you deal with this issue of choice by expanding the amount of disposable time that people have. So that's about a shorter working week, and it's about a higher level of adjusting the minimum wage so it fits with shorter hours, and not just trapping. And also, it's almost like a kind of a subsidy to a low-paid sector. So, we don't need to worry about providing social care for people because they've got UBI. They've got a tiny little bit of money so that they can struggle along looking after elderly relatives. I mean, maybe if people want to do that, maybe that's the way, but I would far rather see a service that gave them respite care and supportive care, and there are day centres and much more sort of social interaction than trapping people at home with a tiny amount of money. That's not choice.
I think.
Go on. Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, no, I think that's a total misunderstanding of what I was actually saying. I was not suggesting that people should just stay at home in order to get paid, but I was saying that you should be able to make that decision depending on your circumstances. You should be able to make that decision. You know your circumstances, you know what you're capable of, but you have to have a basic income flow.
And Diane S says in the chat, and how do you define nasty work? Fruit picking is great. And wash the dishes and wash your mind. At the moment, it's been the low paid work, caring, for example, that was considered nasty work, and that's terrible. Michael, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting interaction there between Anna and Tchiyiwe. I think it's like, let's not pretend it's just a false choice between one or the other. I think, I think that taking the fruit picking example, I would like to think that if there is a shortage of backpacker labour, that some of those farmers and people in agriculture are going to have to rethink about maybe paying people more in order to work picking, which is really hard labor, as well as however enjoyable it might be for people that do it. But I think there's an interesting thing here about what happens to some markets where you can't just get away with paying people crap anymore. So I would disagree with that. It's not like a subsidy for low pay. Actually, it may well reshift some of the labour market relationship, where some employers will have to think about making the jobs have better pay and better terms and conditions in order to work there. I think but one broad thing about work though is, and I think Anna is right, that I don't think anyone's talking about a basic income that is so high in which everyone can just quit their jobs and do nothing. That A, that's one point, and B, no one does that. No, that's just a misunderstanding of human nature. We all want to contribute. We all want to take part in society. We all want to work. I'm just defining work not as like waged labor. Like, work is something that we all want to do. And actually, we all have ideas of what we want to be doing. And it's probably not what we're currently doing very often. And I think we need to reimagine what work is. And basic income isn't going to like move us to a society in which we all like sit around and do nothing. Partly because it's not going to be enough, but also just because no one wants to do that. People are going to want to continue to work. They might, though, want to work less. And that's why I think one way of like helping, I think that's why basic income sits alongside 4-day work week really well, in order to help help pay for that. So I think there's so all the stories we hear is people want to work less, but yeah, they do want to carry on working, and that might be as a choice. They might want to spend more time. Perhaps not every day of the week. They don't want to see their child go off and see a carer, however high quality it is. Maybe one of those days they do want to care for them themselves, and it's just having that actual choice. That's not going to one or the other. It's actually going to be a bit more complicated than that as we move forward into what's going to be a complicated relationship that we all have with work in the next few decades.
I think it's quite interesting, that point, isn't it, around, and we've seen this also with our new framing of key workers and what work is seen as essential, and also how it's valued financially. And I remember at one point going along to a talk where they were suggesting that the people that do the shit, like the toughest jobs, should be paid much higher. And so we actually get into this interesting question around what is meaningful work, what is quality work, if there's jobs that people don't want to do, can we use technology to do them? And there's this really interesting idea of human work being focused around the 3 C's, which is care, creativity, and craft. And so I think there's a kind of interesting moment to really discuss how we value different work, and if there's jobs that we need people to do that people don't want to do, then people are going to have to be compensated better than they are right now. So I guess it does, UBI puts people in a position of being able to be in a stronger negotiating position for the types of labour that people might not be interested in doing.
Or UBI would simply subsidise low wages.
Yes, also another way of looking at it. And I guess it again depends on the amount of UBI that is given, and I think that's also quite interesting to see that there's such a range of different proposals there in terms of who's supporting the idea, and the details of it seem to be very important in that context as well.
Just to say, like, I think there are other things, you could, by taking that argument to an extent, I don't think anyone says like child benefit kind of subsidizes low wages. Like the kind of us having like a little bit more power and a little bit more unconditional cash in our system would enable, like, the argument goes, and I agree this should be tested on a much larger scale, but the argument goes is that people will have a little bit more power to say no to exploitation. That might be a bad employer, also might be a crap landlord, it might be an abusive relationship. Just having some power, I'm not saying it's going to be enough to completely change everything, but that will change the dynamics in a way. And I think that in itself can be really transformative. And as I said earlier, it will give people that breathing space. It's not about getting to, basic income is going to mean that someone can do X, Y, or Z, but it will give them the breathing space to be able to think about doing that, and also start to build relationships with other people in similar positions. As an organizer, one of the most common things that working with amazing people, and you probably have it in all of your transition groups around the world, is that you have these amazing people that have amazing ideas, but just have no time or headspace to participate. And actually, this is an idea of giving them at least a little bit of that to ensure that people can participate, and through participation is where we're going to get the change, not through just having a cash payment, however much it is or however regular it is.
Do you not think that you would get that time and that headspace through a shorter working week with a decent pay for the, better wages and a decent income floor? If everyone worked a 4-day week, everyone would have a whole extra day to take part in politics, to do community work, to all the things that you're describing.
Not if they didn't have enough money to do that. No,
I'm saying it needs to be combined with decent rates of pay.
Yeah, but if you're not in work, that's what I'm saying. I think we've got to move away from like the kind of traditional model is that work is.
I'm talking about. I'm talking about, the advantages of a shorter working week, which is I know it's not the subject of this discussion, but I think it needs to be part of it in a way that if you do, and we're really, this is a battle we're winning now, going towards a 4-day week or a 30-hour week, or however you want to describe it. And I think that it's combining that with wages that are calibrated to suit, so that the hourly wage is increased, so that when you are working, you're getting paid more. And then you have time, and we need to be fighting for that as well.
Yes,
and I led, as I said, I led on the living wage campaign for a number of years, and I think it's your graph really nicely illustrates it. The kind of the cash benefit side of things partly is going to be provided through better paid work, through a living wage and better. But as you say, it's not the only form, because not everyone's going to be in work, and our relationship with work is going to change. So I think that's, as you say, some element of unconditional cash is going to have to play a role in supporting people as a guarantee.
The shorter the working week, the more we can spread around the employment, so that everyone has some employment. That's also important. I mean, I know it's not a simple equation.
Well, yes, I think the shorter working week is a whole kind of, an idea that I think many of us see as part of the solution as well, and something we could almost do a whole nother session on. So yeah, absolutely. Thank you for bringing that in there, Anna. And I think, Rob, should we move on to closing comments from speakers now around how people can get involved?
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah, so any closing thoughts from our speakers on how people might get involved? What would you say if people have been inspired by this evening and they'd like to get more involved in these campaigns and more involved in the push to try? It feels like during COVID, as Michael said, has been a huge missed opportunity, that we keep we could do this or we could do that, and we keep doing that every time, and sort of taking the less brave decision. What could people do if they're inspired by this evening, they want to get involved? How can they get involved?
Hey Rob, sorry to interrupt. I have to say, I've been monitoring the chat and pulling out your questions to help the facilitators this evening. You, our audience, are on fire tonight. The complexity you've embraced in the chat is outstanding. People are wrestling with this like proper sleeves rolled up. I mean, well done. It's all in there in the chat. I just had to say it because hats off to you. There's so many tussles and what ifs and that and so much going on in there. So just before closing comments, speakers, you have absolutely energized this room. Thank you so much. Sorry, Rob, to interrupt, but I had to off to our audience a little bit.
Thank you, Rich. Beautiful intervention. Tchiyiwe.
All right, my colleague Johnny will post some links on there where you can get involved with the UBI Lab Network. So there are various labs around the world that we have. But also, I just wanted to just touch a little bit on the changing nature of work. There's also the aspect where people will actually be needing to upskill in most cases, and so again, a UBI is your best chance at getting that done. Just putting it out there. So UBI Lab Network on Twitter and ubilabnetwork.org. And then tomorrow night, we've got an event as part of the Festival of Debate, where Michael Pugh, the mayor that was actually leading on the Stockton pilot in the United States, the one that's really produced some impressive results in the last month. He'll be speaking, and he'll be speaking to some of the beneficiaries of that UBI basic income. So if you could join us tomorrow, that's festivalofdebate.com. I'll just type that. Thank you.
And Tchiyiwe, are there UBI labs in different cities in the UK? How does it work? Could you just?
Yeah, they're not in all cities, but we have we have about 40 labs now. Within the UK, there are around 30, and then there are some outside of the United Kingdom. Then there are some that are not geographically located. So there's like UBI Lab Women, UBI Lab LGBTQ+, so they're issue-based labs as well that you could join. And yeah, if you go onto ubilabnetwork.org, you'll be able to find all the labs. 30 are UK-based labs. My colleague Johnny has just typed in there. So thanks, Johnny.
Thank you, Tchiyiwe. That's fantastic. Anna, if people are listening thinking, right, social guarantee, here we go, I want to get involved and make that happen, what can they do?
Well, they go to the website. We're launching it officially in June. You can find out about it. You can sign up, so you'll be told about it when we're ready to go more public with it. We can engage you in conversation. Have you all got that that link? Do you want me
Yes.
You've all got
Sure
that.
It can get popped in the
yes, and since I think I'm here in a minority among people who've been passionate advocates of UBI for so long, I just say to all of you lot, please come on our website, have a look, engage with us, and make it part of your campaign. That's what we want. It needs to be part of your campaign. So you see income as having the two sides of the same, the virtual side and the cash side, and never let the cash side destroy the social income. That would be a disaster for all of us.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you. And lastly, Michael.
Yeah, hopefully not least.
Definitely not least.
I think Richard was right. Like tonight, such a rich conversation, and it always is with basic income and basic services. It just sparks so many different, like by definition, they go to everyone, right? And so therefore it intersects with so many elements of our lives and work. So we create, at the basic income conversation, we exist to support people to start your own conversations. We think that we need to start spreading the word. I think there was a poll that only 8% of people knew what a basic income was or a UBI was. So we need to spread the word. We need to start developing leaders in our movement. And we think the best way to do that is through telling stories and having conversations. And we think all of you have the ability to start your own basic income conversation. That might be with like 5 or 10 people. I challenge you all to think about how you can, just with your friends and family, or you're all part of transition groups, you're all connected by definition, start having conversations. It might be in your workplace, in your community, wherever it might be. Start a conversation like the one that you've had. However, I appreciate that can be really daunting. I remember telling like my mum about basic income for the first time, and she was like, what, this is crazy. So actually having some resources behind you to help you do that is what we've created. So we've created the Basic Income Conversation Toolkit, which is a toolkit which you can download from our website, which I've just put in the chat box there. And basically the toolkit is there for you. We've provided a bit of an agenda for how you want to start your own conversation, and some top tips and some resources and things to help you get started. And basically we're here to support you throughout the journey. We offer some training for people who are having lots of these conversations, to think about how we develop your work. So go to our website, download the toolkit, get a date in the diary to start talking with 5 or 10 people in your networks, and start having this conversation and spreading it, because I think that's how we're going to start. To answer the question earlier, that's how we're going to start influencing more and more people and ultimately making it happen. We also have got events coming up, but that you can find those on our website as well.
Great. So lastly, we're going to close by letting you all show your appreciation for tonight's awesome guest by unmuting everybody's microphone, allowing you to shower them all in a kind of blizzard of loveliness, of appreciation for our amazing 3 panelists. Thank you, everybody, and good night, and see you next time.
Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, speakers.
Thank you.
Fantastic stuff.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.